So like I said, my name's Dave. A couple things, factoids about me. Full name, Dave Laribee. I'm a full stack coach, independent coach, kind of working, like I said, full stack, technically into also product issues. What kind of products are we developing? I tend to kind of tap out at a smaller team scale, so 80 or less. So it could be a team of teams, but it's product development and heavily influenced by extreme programming. I've been doing that for over 10 years, and also design thinking, which you'll see a lot of in this presentation, so I won't go super deep on that. I work with startups to Fortune 50s, and I'm a former VersionOne employee. I was the Agile development coach at VersionOne. So their only internal coach working kind of with issues of what do we develop, how do we develop it. So that's a little bit about my background. Also, Alt.NET OG. Some of you guys will recognize that. So this is the disclaimer part. There are 8 million stories in the naked city. These are ours, or these are just a few. The point of view I'm expressing here, I'm not trying to say you should adopt this point of view. This is the way everyone should do it. I'm just saying if you are in a position to influence teams, you might want to consider expanding your horizons and looking outside of software development. My company's Noir. That's the Impossible Object logo. All right. So I build teams. Together we build products. So what you're about to see, this is kind of my point of view on how we do that. This is the kind of the juice that I bring to the action, so to speak. So I mentioned VersionOne. Spent 6 years there, very long time, which is kind of a unique thing. When you get to spend 6 years at an organization, you really get to see how your efforts pan out. You get to see, did my experiment in object-oriented programming and POCOs and test-driven development actually work? What you're seeing here is a visualization from a tool called Gorse, very fast, sped-up visualization. This is probably about 5 months, but what you're seeing is a whole team. This is kind of an XP team in action, a whole team kind of working through it. We've just released. People are going away, taking some time. We just hired Steve Harmon. Now we're doing a second release. We're working on it, and see some interesting behaviors emerge from this. This is about the most technical thing you'll see in this presentation, so if that bothers you, just full disclosure. So a little bit of background, kind of a neat thing, Gorse. I describe myself as peripatetic. That is, I am a hired gun, right? Have gun, will travel. I will go and fix shops. I go anywhere, usually anywhere. There are some clients I won't take. I do have some standards. But I travel a lot, and I go to different places, and I get to work with a lot of different teams, doing a lot of different things, more than just web and mobile. I like this definition because this is one of those weird things that peripatetic, traveling from place to place, especially working or based in various places for relatively short periods, but also Aristotelian. It's kind of a weird definition. These two don't really match, but I kind of also feel, I don't know if Aristotelian's right, but I have used Plato to describe domain-driven design in MSDN magazine. So we're going to kind of focus on the Aristotelian part. So I think the state of the industry, and I understand there's like kind of this learning curve where you are in the learning curve, going deep on something like F# or functional programming, it makes super sense. I get it. I've done it myself. I don't not recommend it, but I think when you start to kind of move past and master some of these technical basics or technical fundamentals, we won't call them basics, but fundamentals, that it's important to kind of get up and look around and see what else is happening. What's happening in a human context? What's happening in an organizational context? I'm going to do it. I debated, should I open up with a Steve Jobs quote? I know it's like the ultimate hubris, and I'll probably lose half of you, but I'm going to do it anyway. Technology alone is not enough. It's technology married with liberal arts, married with the humanities, that yields us the results that make our hearts sing. And that's essentially what this talk is about, is how can we take from outside of technology to make what we're doing with technology more impactful, more interesting. How can we make more joyful customers? How can we make happier teams? So a little bit more background. Why did I arrive at this kind of point of view? So this is the hype cycle. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, and this is something Gartner sells as like kind of one of their analysis products. let's separate that from what it is. And you can kind of see the various points in the cycle. You have some technology trigger, microservices, peak of inflated expectations, microservices, where we are now, trough of disillusionment, microservices, where you're about to be in 6 to 8 months with microservices, slope of enlightenment, it's component orientation. We understand there's some value to be drawn from here, and then plateau productivity. We understand components are good, we understand how CAP theorem works, that kind of thing. So I want you to keep this model in mind. Now this is kind of confessional, this is my kind of background, a little bit of memoir here, but I started with a very traditional path of developer, and I'm supposed to be a CTO, right? So developer, senior developer, architect, director, VP. And at that point, I kind of tapped out. I said, this really isn't for me. Couple reasons. This kind of sums it up. I think if you haven't read the Gervais principle, you absolutely must, right? But I kind of saw myself going up in the top of the pyramid, and I understood there's some predilections, some instincts that I shouldn't necessarily indulge in, right? Also, I saw myself kind of living out a career and being surrounded by peers that were at the top of this triangle. Now, I've met some very good leaders. This is not meant to insult all executives. There are some good leaders, but one thing about management I'll say is part of it's dealing with personal crises, right? So I can barely deal with my own, much less a personal crisis per employee or per report times 2 per month, right? So I kind of tapped out of that. And maybe for you, again, this is my story. I'm not saying, it's not cool to be a sociopath. So, I had been a developer, and I'd been an okay developer. I'm not a 10X or anything, but I'm above average, right? I've read a bunch of books and practiced a bunch and pretty eager to get into it. And so I'm like, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pivot, and I'm just going to be one of these alpha developers, and I'm just going to go whole hog, and I'm going to get all this stuff. I'm going to get all the merit badges, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to be that guy, right? I'm going to be the fixer, I'm going to go kind of like full tilt, right? Just all in. Like in the wheel of death, just let's do it, Thunderdome. Kind of explains maybe a little bit of some of the alt.net stuff. The problem with that is you could do that, and you should. I think you should. I think it's very good to kind of try craftsman, to try to hone that craftsmanship mentality and really be the best programmer you can. And like Uncle Bob says, be a professional, right? Totally agree. Again, not dismissing that. But for me, think about the hype cycle, right? I got bored. It gets a little boring kind of doing that. What ends up happening is when you kind of get pretty good at this, you end up kind of teaching and coaching, which is where I ended up. So this did kind of lead me to a good place. So, this is the kind of standard model of flow. And what I found for me personally, career-wise, and this may resonate with some people in the room, is that when you find yourself dipping into frustration, boredom, anxiety, it might be time to kind of pivot, or it might be time to kind of metacognate and start thinking about what's happening in your career, right? And so that's kind of where I am. Those are the 2 phases. I don't think I'm a special snowflake by any standard, but I have been in the business for almost 20 years, so that you may end up there, you may already be there. I like to think of the hype cycle when I think of that. So when I got bored, what I started doing is looking at some of the things that had fed me in my prior life. So I'm a college dropout, but I did go to a liberal arts school up and through my junior year. Then I started writing embedded C code because it paid really, really well, better than being a computer lab tech in a VAX VMS lab. But nonetheless, I started looking at some of the stuff that really intrigued me and started reading again, really, reading non-technical stuff. Going out and going to the library and checking out books and reading them, right? So I didn't totally check out of software. I still was working. This is around VersionOne, still working, still doing a job, doing a pretty good job, but really I kind of switched to that 9-to-5 developer where I was doing my job, then I'd come home and read about, Foucault. So that's kind of a little bit of background. That's where this comes from. Okay. So a couple questions. What are humans good at, and what makes us special? Let me take a few. What are humans good at? What's that? Trolling? Humans are good at trolling. You're right. What else? What are some of the things that make it that a machine can't do? What? Emotions. Yeah. Okay. You cut right to the core. Let's stop right there. You're supposed to say things like trivia, right? Humans are great at trivia. Humans just fantastic at kind of being able to answer these questions. How about stories? Humans are good at stories. Yes, humans are good at stories, but as it turns out, there is a writer who never gets blocked, tired, or drunk. This writer comes from a company called Narrative Science. They make software that writes articles about, they write newswire articles about football games, articles about political events. Not much to write about in the US right now, but. So this is a robot that writes stuff. How about innovation? Innovation, that's a uniquely human thing. Well, it turns out there's a company called Imagination Engines, and they have a machine that will innovate. It will create innovative designs within reason, right? Oral-B, for example, contracted with this company to have a new toothbrush design. And what it will do is it will concurrently explore a solution space, right, and just generate a bunch of designs, radar antennas. And you can hire this robot or this company to design stuff for you, to innovate for you. So these are areas, we might kind of classically consider human, right? But I think given the people in this room, we're kind of approaching this moment, and I'm not going to go all Kurzweil on you in singularity. I'll let this play while I kind of mumble a bit. But we're kind of approaching this moment where the software we're creating is pushing the boundary of what is human, right? We are, we are displacing jobs. We are automating things. We are making humanity more efficient. We are challenging the notion of scarcity, right? This is a fact. This is happening. So it's not wild to think, Uncle Bob was talking about the future of programming. It's not wild to think 50 years into the future, the kind of programming we're doing is no longer necessary. Google, for example, just open sourced their AI engine. You can have it. They did that because the data is the stuff that matters, right? The data modes, that's the means of production right now. I promise I'll stop with the communism stuff in a second, but this is scary to me, right? It can be scary, or we can kind of adopt, we can start to think of what humans are good at. I want to plant that seed in your head, right? So how do we deal with the robot threat? Interestingly, this is yet another machine. This is an 808 drum machine. This is what Dr. Dre uses to make mad beats. But I like to kind of think about this notion of sampling culture, right? So the liberal arts programmer samples. And this is nothing new. We sample all the time. You go to any kind of talk at any conference like this, and people are going to drop mad white papers on you. They're going to say, did you read this? Did you read this? Did you read this from 1973? Right? And you probably should read it. I mean, there are whole clubs that you can attend where people go and read these kind of deep-cut technical papers. And I would like to go to that club, right? But what I'm kind of trying to advocate is that there's a different club. There's a different club that looks for, connections outside of software development. So as we look for, what has been done before in software, we can also say, gee whiz, what has been done before in all of human history? And I want to show you a few examples. So for me, it's about lateral thinking. If we kind of constrain ourselves to the box of software development, and there are times that we should, I'm going to stop disclaiming any time now. If we're going to kind of constrain ourselves to that space, then we're going to end up with solutions that are constrained by that space. There's a guy in the audience that can tell you all about it, right? So sampling. Let's look at some samples. Now, if I had a drum machine, this would program my pads like this. Okay, and I put this together, and I ended up making about a day's worth of content, so I've done my best to kind of pare it down. We'll see. So let's look first from a couple examples from architecture. Oscar Niemeyer, okay? So we all kind of have this notion of what a software architect is, and remember me kind of saying as a whippersnapper, I'm going to be a software architect because software architect gets me to director, and this is what a software architect does. Well, let's look at a real architect. Oscar Niemeyer is probably most famous for Brasilia, a really beautiful picture of Brasilia. Brasilia is this planned city, pretty new. This is high modernism. 1960. We're going to create a capital, and it's going to be created from a bunch of forests. We're just going to cut it all down, and we're going to build this city. Every structure is going to pop up at the same time. Really interesting story. You end up with something like this. It's not the best photograph. It's not necessarily a slam dunk that it's bad. But when we start to look a little bit into this story, we see issues with Brasilia. Namely, I didn't get the scale in here, but this is about 500 feet. So imagine walking, and it was designed with walkways and everything. Imagine walking from your home to the chapel or walking from your home to the work center. I mean, it is a long haul. As you're walking, nothing really changes. The perspective, very slight parallax on perspective until you approach this opposing thing. Brasilia, not necessarily the most successful experiment. It was kind of the ultimate experiment in terms of modern architecture of the day. Le Corbusier, for example, was going out and trying to level Paris, or trying to drop this part of New York and build a whole planned community. But this actually happened, and it ended up kind of problematic. I think there's something that we can learn from Oscar. Namely, big architecture doesn't work. This is nothing new. We know this doesn't work, right? But this is something that the Agilists said when? 90s? They kind of started to come up with this. Fred Brooks, I think, hinted at it a little bit and back in the day. But had you been kind of paying attention, you could imagine pulling this lesson from history. And we're going to see some things that aren't quite so obvious, or hindsight 2020. Let's talk about another bald white guy, Buckminster Fuller. We'll call him Bucky. Bucky had some wild ideas. Some kind of, this is the Dymaxion car. This is he had a whole kind of suite of solutions for futurism. And it's the very 60s sci-fi kind of futurism. Everything is like this utopian vision. And the guy had some really great stuff. I think there's Spaceship Earth, which is his kind of manifesto that Earth is a spaceship and we should treat it as such, because if you're stuck on the spaceship, you should have a strategy for dealing with trash, right? But let's focus a little bit more on something very tangible. Doing more and more with less and less until eventually you can do everything with nothing. This is called Ephemeral Ization, right? Ephemeral Ization is this idea that material ultimately becomes unimportant. We see this now, today, right, with the iPad. Okay, so our applications are these kind of abstractions that exist on this device that is pretty much neutral, right? It's approaching 2 dimensions. It's becoming flatter and flatter. It's becoming nothing, right? Now, I think kind of taking it more into the realm of opinion and something that's a little bit more interesting from a newness perspective, I am going to quote Uncle Bob here. Couldn't be more with the guy. And this is something when I'm working with teams, I see them fall down over and over again. They're writing their application code, but they're writing to Chef, right? They're writing to Rails. They're writing to Express.js, Node.js, right? They're writing to that API instead of pulling things out. So we can look at another visual metaphor from architecture. This is James Wine's High Rise of Homes. This one, I think, expresses the kind of architecture we're looking for, right? We're looking for these nice little homes built around this structure, right? Architecture matters, certainly, especially if you live on the 8th floor of this thing. You really want that to hold up. But the interior of your home as a developer is where you really care about. So this is the kind of thing I'm looking for. These are visual metaphors. All right, so thus ends architecture. So let's pull out, and let's talk about another area, history. So I really like this. Does anyone know about this tunnel of Eupalinos? Okay, awesome. This is going to blow your mind. Okay, tunnel of Eupalinos. Let's say 2 teams, 6th century before Common Era. You have a job. You pull a user story off your backlog. Build an aqueduct through this mountain in a ridiculous amount of time, right? So the 2 teams, I got a little ahead of myself, but the 2 teams part is, Eupalinos is like, how do I do this? Well, it was 6th century BCE, so he did have the luxury of a lot of, shall we say, cheap labor. But he got it done. His crew got it done. The way they did it is they broke up into 2 teams and invented essentially modern surveying techniques to start at opposite ends of the mountain and dig through and come to the middle. What you're seeing is the top view, a 2 scale of how accurate they were, and a bottom view, so that's from the top. A side view is the second one. It's pretty damn close. This is 6th century BCE. Now, around 2006, I had a startup. I had an XP team, about 10 people, very talented, good team. But we had a big thing to do, right? And I'm like, this is kind of a no-no, right? But I'm like, the team decided to break up into 2 teams. And we did the exact same thing. Essentially, I don't know, 3 to 4 years before it happened, we stumbled on this kind of notion of API first. And API first is one of those things that, like, I wish I had written that because I'd done it. The Eupalinos, knowing this, kind of helped me say, look, team, 6th century BC, Eupalinos did this, surely we can do this, right? And you were talking contract negotiation. Even before API first, to bring Fred Brooks up again, this is something that if you go back in the past and look, you could arrive at the solution. It just so happens that I arrived at it through a class I took on antiquity. Okay. All right. So let's talk design. Now, it's worthy mentioning at this point, when I say liberal arts, I mean modern liberal arts. We're talking about studying even biology, psychology, that all falls under the purview of liberal arts. It's really the name liberal arts programmer is a contrivance just to say, hey, look outside of super technical issues. So design, you might argue, is in the purview of what we do. Certainly technically, things like TDD, right? Things like domain-driven design has the name in it, right? But we're talking more kind of design, capital D design. If we went to someone on the street and said, what is design? They would say this. So something I've kind of cargo culted from the design world into the technical arena that I work in is this notion of heuristics. We have this kind of agile principle from back in the day. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. This is something that permeates the agile kind of rhetoric and literature, and it's a very important and very, very difficult thing to achieve. You have Kent Beck's original Simple Design. This is a great, I think, first attempt at communicating it, right? It's the fewest elements, no duplication, reveals intention, passes the test. I love Kent Beck. He kind of nailed it, right? But I think we can also look to other areas. This is Jacob Nielsen's 10 usability heuristics. So a usable system should provide visible system status. It should provide a match between the system and the real world, kind of like ubiquitous language and domain-driven design. It should give user control and freedom, consistency and standards. So when I look at one screen and I can OK cancel, I go to the same place for those actions on another screen. Error prevention, recognition rather than recall. Looking at an application kind of lets me know what to do. I shouldn't have to remember to go deep into this menu. Flexibility and efficiency of use. Aesthetic and minimalist design. We've all seen web forms, or we've all seen websites with tons and tons of options. Help users we also Office. Help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors, and help and documentation. So these are the 10 heuristics that Jacob Nielsen says are important in building a usable system. So for me, code is a product, right? Our code base is a product. Developers, programmers, you are the user of that product. It's a meta product. It's a product-to-product situation. That product ends up yielding another product, right, which an end user will use. But your use of that product is very much a usability problem. And if we apply those principles, we can end up with better code. A code base is a user experience. Users of code bases are called developers. Okay. So there are 6 up here. I was a little concerned with timing. So the last one I want to go into is evolution and biology. Now this is science, this isn't liberal arts, but we already covered that. So emergent design, the kind of holy grail of XP and TDD and domain-driven design, is that we're able to start building a system, and we trust that that system will emerge, the system, the beauty and the correctness and the fit and the utility of that system will emerge, right? And this is like I said, it's the holy grail. This is super, super hard thing to sell. When I go into a Fortune 50 company, that, the developer, that you're working with has been there for 8 years, and they're incented on a kind of a project culture where they spend 6 months to 12 months working on something, and then they move on. And that, as far as they know, that thing was a success because it was just thrown over the wall to maintenance. They don't really get a sense for the value of switching to something like emergent design because they have only experienced big design up front. They've only ever experienced incrementation and not iteration, right? So for me, it is about iteration. Iteration is the fundamental selling point when I am going to coach Agile teams. They're like Agile, let's ship increments. Look at SAFe. SAFe is this insidious monster of a software methodology. There's some good parts, but in general, the way it's being implemented is crazy. But it's like this meta. It's like if Scrum and Voltron had a baby. And SAFe is all about these product increments, and these increments ship, right? And so people are kind of shipping these fully formed features. Now, what iteration helps you do is get feedback. Is this feature a good idea? Do our customers like it? Are we making the right thing, right? So that emergent design, it's not only necessary to making like a product that actually creates joyful users, it's an incredibly tough sell. Right? It's a very hard thing. Not only that, it's really, what you're selling is evolutionary design. So emergent design is this notion that the design will emerge over time. And we can start simply and engage with our customer and take feedback, and that feedback will affect the system, and the system will achieve product market fit in a way like lean startup is emergent design for business plans, right? Evolutionary design is a whole nother thing, and that's really what we're doing. Evolutionary design and evolution, first you have deniers, right? You have people who are like, no, we can't trust this will happen. It's the sales problem. But the thing with evolutionary design, emergent design, evolutionary design, there are decimation events. This is Stephen Jay Gould and Niels Eldredge, right? Their work on evolution was essentially you have these moments where there's a decimation event and a whole bunch of species or a whole class of species are wiped out. Think dinosaurs, think meteor coming down, right? And if you're going to do emergent design with your software, you will have these decimation events. There'll be an event, there'll be a market condition change, there'll be a regulatory change. VersionOne, we introduced a whole new concept into the model that quite dramatically changed the model. We had to take 2 weeks, stop what we were doing, which was trucking. You saw the Gorse video. Take 2 weeks, stop what we're doing, pivot, incorporate those changes. And that's just, again, something people aren't really comfortable with. So On the top, you see this kind of phyletic gradualism. That's before this theory, this notion that species kind of come in and mutate and, slowly, gradually change and go extinct. And what Stephen Jay Gould was arguing is that, no, there are moments where a certain class of species will all be taken out. And this is something we don't do with software in general. What we end up with software are these. Who's read the big ball, speaking of old white papers, big ball of mud. It's required reading, right? We end up with a big ball of mud. We end up with this ossified kind of dung ball of application. And there's the way we used to do it, and the way we used to do it, and the way we used to do it. But there aren't necessarily decimation events. So when I'm coaching teams, and they have these kind of technical debt issues, we talk about evolution. We talk about Stephen Jay Gould's theory. We talk about what decimation events could happen to improve that kind of software. Okay. So, why does this matter? Why does this matter? I think this job is about programming with people. I think, yes, technology, it does matter. If you have to have the skills to pay the bills. But I think your talent doesn't scale, right? You cannot pull off some of these things outside of a group, right? And inside of that group, how you get that group is by storytelling over stories. We talked a little bit about how a machine can generate stories for the AP wire. This team won this match over this team. But storytelling is a fundamentally human activity. That's something robots, we can't conceive of them replacing until they can make a complete replica, and then we're all doomed, right? Until the Skynet comes online. But I promised I wouldn't go Kurzweil. When we're talking to each other, using these kind of metaphors and using these examples helps us kind of understand and get on the same page. Helps us kind of rationalize, oh, okay, I see what you mean. Great book, Metaphors We Live By. Our ordinary conceptual system, in terms of which we both think and act, is fundamentally metaphorical in nature. This is George Lakoff, Metaphors We Live By. So I think it's easy to be dismissive of metaphors, but the fact of the matter is our entire kind of conception system is based on metaphors, right? Using these kind of metaphors helps us understand what are we doing with software, what's happening with our software. Where are we headed as a team? Are we headed into Brasilia territory with this? This echoes, again, Kent Beck. The system metaphor is a story that everyone, customers, programmers, and managers can tell about how the system works, right? I think this might be the only presentation that you ever see on XP system metaphor, but I find it to be hugely, hugely important as we're telling stories about each other, as we're rationalizing about our systems, as we're thinking about what our organizations are doing. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is achieve a gestalt. Really the second, so a configuration pattern or organized field having specific properties that cannot be derived from the summation of its component parts, a unified whole. That is where we're kind of trying to head. So this is a work in progress. I'm trying to figure out what those drum pads are. I would love it if afterwards you could come up to me and talk to me. I'll be out tonight having a beer. I'm working on this quite a bit. I'm going to be doing this talk a bunch next year. This is the last time this year. It's the second time I've done it. I think one way you can kind of think about getting to this, on my way of the hypes, on my kind of dip in the hype cycle, what I did is I just kind of deleted everything out of my feed reader and said, I'm just going to start following this other stuff. And I'm going to exchange my technical stack of books for a different stack of books. I keep a reference file in Evernote that I find really, really handy, and I find that I kind of draw on that quite a bit in storytelling, in coaching, in real gigs. All right. So with that, I know I ended a little early. I don't necessarily believe in time limits, but we could take questions, or I can let Dieter Rams play us out. Okay. That's it. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.